There we go. So, welcome everybody. We'll just talk a little bit while we're checking to see how many people are hopping on. Thank you so much for joining us tonight with our special guest, Marty Omoto. I think you will find it informative. I know there's a lot of things going on. It's really hard to keep on top of everything. So, Marty, thank you for spending time with us tonight to give us a non-political point of view and keeping it simple so that families and individuals can understand what this means to them. So thank you so much. I'm going to give it just a second more. For those of you who are hopping on, please make sure you go down into the chat, usually on the bottom, sometimes at the top, and there's something that looks like a world, and you can choose either English or Spanish. So make sure you hop on the English or the Spanish station, and that way, if we have questions, the interpreter can read them back, and so we'll be able to make sure we're accommodating everybody. Another quick reminder is please make sure if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Tonight, Marty is going to kind of stop after each section so we can ask questions specific to that. And I'll be going through the chat and can ask them the questions. So with that, I am going to introduce Marty Omoto. For those of you who don't know, I looked up Marty. I was cheating and I was looking on the internet to see how long you've been doing CD Can, and it said 1987, your newsletter. Does that sound right? No? Before?
It was a little bit late. It was later,
Okay.
1990s, but
Okay, so almost 40 years you've been advocating, and just because I know a little bit of your history, I know it's been even longer than that. You were born advocating. So Marty is a father, he's a brother, he's a grandfather of I don't even know how many grandchildren do you have now? Four? Oh, six. I was way off. And just a longtime advocate of not only our autism community, but disabilities and seniors as well. So I I think you're in for a real treat tonight. Again, if you have any questions, Marty's going to tackle the federal information first. But if you have any questions,
yeah.
please put it in the chat, and I'll read it to them when we take a break. So with that, Marty, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you do a little bit better introduction than I did.
No, I think that's fine. I just want everyone to know that first of all, thank you for inviting me. Uh, as Beth was saying, I've been a family member. My older sister had developmental disabilities, also autism. She passed away in 2003, but I was closest to her in age. There were seven of us in my family, and so I went to school with her and saw. My family treated her very well, my parents, but I when I went to junior high school with her, so it goes back a long time ago, September 1966. That's how long when I marked that I became a advocate, when I saw how other people treated her and people laughed at her and nobody did anything. Um, and that's when I realized that if I didn't speak up, even at 12 years old, then the teachers weren't. They were allowing people to humiliate her and the other uh, kids in special ed. And so that I learned then, and that has taught me ever since then, that when you don't speak up and when you let others harm other people, what happens is the people that you care about end up um, getting harmed and getting hurt. And you're never going to be totally ready uh, to speak up and to know what you're going to do. I was 12 years old. No one told me that it would be my job to speak up and be there for my older sister. And nobody trained me on how to do those things as I got older. And so for all of us, we're at different stages in terms of experience uh, and also knowledge of what we need to do, and also time and resource. As a father now of a 32-year-old son with Down syndrome and autism and behavioral health needs, I know what it is that time and resources is very limited for all of us. And so we have to think about all those things and then how do we, and I learned through my advocacy and through forums like this, how do we end up linking with each other, connecting with each other to find the strength or to find the time that we could kind of partner together with our time that we cannot otherwise do ourselves. And it's just, I think the lesson we'll learn, the first lesson you should learn, all of us should learn and remember is that we are not alone. But if we don't connect to each other, then we are alone. And so forums like this are very, very important. Um, you were asking the question about just going, and I don't know how much people know what's going on at the federal level, meaning what's going on in Washington, D.C. And and I'll try to explain it in ways that are understandable because you should not feel badly that it may be very confusing what is happening in Washington in Congress. It is very confusing to almost everybody. And it's going to be important to understand there's several things happening, and we need to unfortunately, we need to focus on all the things at the same time because they will or could impact all of us, you and your families. Um, some of them already have impacted our families now, but in the coming days and weeks. So it's not just what Congress is doing, it's what the um, federal agencies like the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, like the U.S. Department of Education, like the Housing and Urban Development Agency, HUD, which provides housing assistance vouchers. All these agencies are having and experiencing loss of employees through layoffs and firings, changes in policy that in fact funding to the states. And all that is happening outside of Congress. So as we go through here, I will kind of go through the list and then take questions, or Beth, you can, jump in. Because unfortunately, we've never faced a situation where we have so many, um, I don't say threats, but things that we have to worry about uh, in so many different departments, all at the same time at the federal and state level. So let's start off with Congress. Congress is trying to pass the House of Representatives, which is controlled by Republicans, passed early this morning a big bill. In fact, it's called a big, beautiful bill, but it's a budget bill. And it makes, among other things, it makes major changes and major reductions to Medicaid. So you may have heard about that. And that was passed by the House of Representatives. It now goes to the U.S. Senate. And the U.S. Senate, is going to try to take that up between, you know, work on it. They maybe make changes to the bill and look at possibly taking a vote on the bill by the end of June. I don't know. Is a translator still on? Okay. So I want to make sure. And if I'm talking too fast, um, please let me know in terms of the translator. If I'm not making sense, that's a different problem. And then Beth will let me know. Uh, in any event, the House of Representatives passed this bill. A lot of the stuff people have heard about, it has not taken effect yet because the U.S. Senate has to pass it. And we don't know what the U.S. Senate is going to do. We do know that many of the Republican senators in the U.S. Senate have outright opposed any additional cuts to Medicaid. And so we'll have to see what happens. Um, they're looking at a possible vote, or what President Trump and what the Republican leadership in both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. and the House of Representatives want to see a final vote on something by July 4th. But that's not a hard, fast date. it could be possible that things get bad in terms of trying to come to an agreement and that nothing gets passed, until late summer. So we really don't know what's going to happen until actually, unfortunately, until it does happen. Uh, the Medicaid cuts will have a major impact if this bill passes the U.S. Senate as it was passed early this morning by the House of Representatives and President Trump signs it. If those cuts remain, it will have a major impact on California in terms of Medicaid funding. Uh, for one thing, they will end um, the ability for states, including California, to raise additional Medicaid funding. It's called a provider tax. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but they are eliminating the ability of the states to do that. California has something that uses, it's called the Managed Care Organization Tax. That raises a lot of additional Medicaid matching funds for California, and that money is then in turn used in the Medi-Cal program here. And so, what that bill in Congress will do is eliminate the ability of the states to actually do that. Um, it- the bill also is calling for able-bodied adults who qualify for Medicaid. There's what they call a work and community engagement requirement, um, 80 hours a week. There are some exclusion. There are many exclusions, actually. People with disabilities, uh, older people. Um, the effective date of that, and there's more details that will be released. And again, none of this is final until the U.S. Senate has a chance to look at this bill and to make changes. So a lot of this could change. That's why I don't want to get in too much detail because again, some of this could change depending on what the U.S. Senate does. But the work requirement will likely remain simply because the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, even those who are strong defenders of Medicaid, are in agreement that there should be some type of work requirement, for people who are what they call able-bodied. Um, the effective date, so what was the big sticking point is when would that go into effect? Originally, the House Republicans looked at that requirement going into effect in 2029. This morning, as a compromise, that date has been moved up to December 31st, 2026. So that's a major change in the Medicaid law. And there's some other ones, what they call redeterminations, reassessments of Medicaid, that would be increased um, reassessments. Um, and so I don't know what other detail, Beth, that you want me to go into, because again, a lot of this could end up changing in the next couple of weeks between now uh, and the end of June.
Really
Even
quick. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, can you talk a little bit more about the reassessments and explain what that is for people who don't understand what it is and why it's considered cost savings?
so, California implemented something like this. Only they they put a requirement to have Medi-Cal, what they call redeterminations, reassessments of individuals to see if they still qualify. They meet the eligibility standards. Normally, it's once a year, and California many years ago, during the budget crisis, implemented a requirement to have that happen 4 times a year. Uh, the federal government, in terms of the House bill, is looking at having that twice a year, meaning to see if people are eligible, rather than having it once a year, twice a year. And the thought process behind it is that in theory, it catches people who, for whatever reasons, their immigration status or income level or some other reason, um, they may no longer be eligible. So therefore, they would be removed from eligibility from Medicaid, and therefore, because they're removed, there's a savings to the federal government because they no longer have to pay for that, and also there would be a savings to the state because the state doesn't have to pay for that as well. But is that a true savings? And the answer, many of us advocates have feel that it's not. And actually, the state of California, when they were implementing something like this several years ago, admitted that it was not. That they knew that many of the people would be kicked off Medi-Cal because of their reassessments weren't being kicked off necessarily because many of them would not be kicked off because they were no longer eligible, but they were being kicked off because they didn't respond in time to a mailing or some other requirement um, regarding reassessments or redetermination. And if they're kicked off, the Medicaid director back then admitted that many of these people would end up coming back on, but it would take several months, maybe even it would take a while. But during that time period, the state was saving money because they were no longer Medi-Cal recipients. And eventually they would come back on. And then so we have to, as advocates, question, first of all, how harmful that is for people who otherwise would be eligible, but simply are kicked off getting health care because they didn't return something in time, or there was some document or some meeting or something didn't happen, so they are then kicked off the rolls. And so that just doesn't seem. Is that the right way to actually what those in Congress were saying? The cuts to Medicaid and changes were to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. But the reality is, when you do something like this, and if it's not done in the right way or for the right reason, you end up you're not cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. You're cutting health care from an individual. And so I think that as we go forward in the coming weeks, we'll see if the U.S. Senate will actually keep that in there, or if they'll make further other changes. We just don't know at this point in time.
So let's talk a little bit about the Medicaid numbers and regional centers. So if the bill goes through the way it's written, what would that mean for regional centers in California?
So we don't, again, if the House bill that was passed early this morning uh, ends up passing at least the Medicaid provisions exactly as is by the U.S. Senate and is signed by President Trump, it will have an impact on regional centers. Actually, not just regional centers, but almost everything, every Medi-Cal program in California. And the reason why that would be, and the timing of that will vary because many of the provisions in the House bill in the bill, um, again, it's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. They have different implementation dates, so some things go into effect sooner than other provisions. So not all the cuts would happen exactly at the same time. But we're talking about major cuts in Medicaid funding to the state of California. Some of the provisions, some of the proposed cuts actually are targeting California directly. And that is, for instance, there's a provision in there, a Medicaid reduction for certain states, and this obviously would include California, that provide government-funded healthcare programs for people not documented. And if a state is doing that, they will see a reduction in part of their Medicaid funding. It's called FMAP, but it's their Medicaid matching funds, a reduction of 10%. That's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to California. And and who are they targeting? Well, we're virtually the only state that is actually providing on a wide scale, statewide basis, state-funded healthcare. It's the state-funded version of Medi-Cal for children and adults who are not documented. And so for doing that, the federal government is saying we're going to penalize you by taking away more of your Medicaid dollars, even though Medicaid is not paying for that, for those services. That's a one major reduction that's going to have impact to California, to the California budget. Not directly to regional centers, but if you're taking away hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, Medicaid dollars from the state budget, the money then has to come from somewhere. That means a lot of the other budget areas that maybe weren't cut heavily during the governor's what they call the May revise, the budget revisions that he released last week, we may get hit because you can't balance a budget if you're losing that amount of money. In addition, we're going to lose what they call the Medicaid provider tax because the bill would not permit states to continue uh, having the ability to do that. The provider tax raises billions of extra Medicaid dollars to the state that helps pay for Medicaid, Medi-Cal programs here. When that's eliminated, meaning ours expires at the end of 2026, we won't be able to renew that. So that's a loss of hundreds, billions of Medicaid dollars. So those are just two examples of major losses of Medicaid funding that will have an impact to the California budget, that in turn will have an impact on funding. And again, we don't know specifically what that would end up being in terms of direct impact to the regional centers or actually any of the major systems that serve people with disabilities, that serve children, that serve seniors. But there would be an impact.
Starting to get questions. Just to remind you guys, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat. To Morgan, yes, we are going to be recording this and we'll be sending it out probably tomorrow with the link. So if you miss anything, you can go back. And I know I've listened to this multiple times and I'm still trying to absorb it. Um, there's a lot of good questions, but what about HCBS and other waiver programs, like self-determination? Can you talk a little bit about, what could happen with those? And maybe for those who don't know, can you give a little background of like what a waiver is?
Yeah, before I do that, there was somebody who asked a question. That's actually a good one. I mean, all of them are good ones. But how are these Medicaid cuts federally going to work in conjunction with the California May revise budget proposal? That's a good question. The answer to that is that the governor's May revise, meaning his budget revisions to the budget that he released in January, and that the legislature is now looking at, um, does not include any of these cuts that are in the House bill and that Congress may eventually pass. And the reason for that is usually the state budgets, at least by the recent governors, don't include things where there's question marks or it's not definite that a reduction is going to happen. So the answer is it doesn't include anything um, in the House bill, the proposed cuts to Medicaid, which again amount to hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, but also um, billions of dollars to California. What will likely happen if this bill or a version of it ends up passing and is signed by the president is that Governor Newsom will likely have to submit additional budget revisions, possibly in the fall, if things are really bad in terms of the loss of Medicaid funds, or call a special session, sometime in the fall, or if when he introduces his budget next January, propose what they call early action budget items, meaning action that he needs a legislature to take in January to address the major changes occurring in Washington in terms of Medicaid cuts. By the way, it's not just Medicaid where there's reductions occurring or problems. And again, Beth, it kind of goes back to your question, sort of, but the state is also not getting the full reimbursements that it would normally get. in terms of disaster recovery. There's a whole bunch of other departments or funding pools of money that the state is supposed to get from the federal government that either the federal government is not providing California or they're putting conditions on it. So that's causing a problem too. Again, all that is happening outside of whatever Congress is doing. To your answer your specific question regarding waivers, many people may not know what a waiver is, but Medicaid has specific rules on how a state can spend money. It's under the Social Security Act, but Medicaid has certain rules, and most of that money, because this Medicaid was passed, the federal law way back in 1965. I don't know how many of you were alive back then, but unfortunately I was. And in those days, um, there was very little community-based organizations or groups providing services to people who were disabled, or it wasn't fully recognized that that was the way people would get services. And so Medicaid was designed to provide additional funding or supports to people who were in institutional settings. Uh, uh, and so what a waiver, and nothing has really changed on that over the years. So there was an attempt to do that when Obamacare was first introduced and passed. There were advocates who really tried to change the basic foundation of Medicaid so that it was that its foundation was community based and not institutional based. But that was not successful. So Medicaid still looks at the foundation of providing supports in an institutional setting. I mean, that's the basis. What the federal government has done, working with the states since the 1980s, and it's expanded over the years, is to provide states with what they call waivers or an exemption to the existing Medicaid laws to allow a state, for instance, to try pilots or demonstration projects to test out ideas about providing funding so that an individual or can live in the community and get supports. Over time, more and more states virtually have uh, requested waivers in order to provide services and get federal Medicaid dollars to people who are living in the community, as that concept of people living in the community and getting their supports in their home or in their community was more accepted and also supported by various Supreme Court decisions. And so those are called waivers because they waive or they exempt existing Medicaid rules. California has many waivers. Most of all the other states virtually provide services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through a federal Medicaid waiver. And that's why they have waiting lists because they only allow so many people, at least those states, to be on the waiver to receive services. In California, we have several waivers, including one, two, right, or three actually, that provide services to people with developmental disabilities. And one of them is called the self-determination waiver that helps provide funding to the self-determination program. And there's two other waivers called we refer to them as the DD waiver, developmental disabilities, but they help provide and funnel money, Medicaid dollars to support community-based services to people with developmental disabilities, in addition to the state funds. And there's other waivers in other systems that help provide money to community-based organizations, managed care plans to provide services in the community for people. So I don't know if that it's still kind of complicated for people to understand what that means. But in order to get those, what they call waivers, which could involve billions of dollars of extra federal money to provide funding, for community-based services, it requires approval from the federal government. and they usually last anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 years, and then you have to seek renewal of the waiver. And so the big danger that California and other states, but especially California, faces that a lot of our waivers will come up for renewal. The first one is the self-determination waiver that comes up for renewal um, at the end of June next year. Um, the state indicated that, and normally what a state does is submit a proposal for renewal several months before that, so probably around March. The problem is we're facing a federal government and the Health and Humans, the Department of Health and Human Services, the federal, and also the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's the federal agency under Health and Human Services that oversees Medicaid. It's headed by Dr. Oz. Um, uh, Many people will say that California has been targeted for whatever reasons, and that we may find it difficult. We may find it difficult to get our waivers renewed. Not that it's not going to happen, but they might put more conditions on approving a waiver. Because if they don't approve those waivers, like the big developmental services waiver that comes up, a couple of years from now, but the self-determination waiver, we're talking about the loss of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. So what conditions could they place on California if when the waivers come up for renewal? They could do what they did in the House bill. Say, if we're going to reduce your funding if you're providing healthcare, government funded healthcare to people not documented. So they already did that in the House bill. Could they put other conditions on that? Yes. Will they? We have no idea if they're going to. Will they say, we'll approve your waiver for renewal, except we're not going to fund anything with DEI in it, meaning anything that remotely deals with service access related to equity. Not that they will do that, but the history and their recent actions in the past couple of months is that, yeah, they could do that. So I think we have to be very, I don't say careful, but our advocacy is going to have to understand that we're going to have to be careful in our advocacy and making sure that and work with the state in getting these waivers renewed, because it's not just the money, though that's obviously a huge part of that we're drawing down critically important federal Medicaid dollars, but those dollars translate into needed services for our children, for our sons and daughters, for our friends, our families, our workers. My son, right now, he gets services from the regional center here in Sacramento. Um, Depends on the services that he gets. As many of you, he gets Medicaid, he gets Medi-Cal, and Medicare. And so a lot of us, it's not just about the money, it's about ultimately the impact to our families and to human lives. So I don't know if I made that real clear about these waivers, but just kind of another way to put it is that the state has the ability to get additional Medicaid dollars um, through these demonstration projects. Let's just call it that. But actually, they're called waivers, and they have to be reapproved during a certain time period, and those are vulnerable. And I think our advocacy is going to have to look at how do we become better, more effective into making sure those waivers are renewed. And so again, the threats or things that we have to think about, I'd rather not call them threats, but we do have to think in terms of our advocacy, not on just one thing, meaning only what's going on in Congress. And some advocacy groups are only focused in on the House bill or what the Senate and the House are going to do in terms of Medicaid. We need to also focus on what the entire federal government can do or is doing that will have a major impact to people here in California. And so it's not just Medicaid, but it's housing, it's transportation, it's disaster recovery. And also when it is Medicaid, it doesn't necessarily have to happen in a bill. Again, the department that oversees Medicaid can issue rules, can issue changes to Medicaid separate from whatever Congress is doing, and that can impact California and reduce our funding. So I don't know if that helps to explain it, but it is complicated um, because on top of all that, we have the state budget process that, you know, most recently the governor issued his May revise that called for major cuts to close a $12 billion budget shortfall that likely will get larger in the fall when we know more about what loss of federal funds we'll be receiving. Um, but we have to deal with that. And so how do we fight back on those things when, the state is also making cuts? And so when people are confused by what's going on, it's not you. It's the reality is there's never been a situation in our lives, and I've been an advocate, for quite a long time now, in a situation where we have this many potential threats facing us at every level of government, federal, state, uh, and so it really means that we have to be different and smarter in our advocacy.
Marty, somebody asked what percentage of regional center funds is currently federal?
Well, it's not 50% because usually a federal Medicaid match is roughly 50%. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's about 40%, maybe 30, 35, 40% roughly. It might be a little bit higher. I can get you the exact number, but yeah.
Nope, that helps. I was just answering a question. Let's switch over to California, because I know we could talk for hours about this. You mentioned California's recent revised budget did not include any of the federal funds or changes that the federal government may make. And did I hear Governor Newsom also say it does not include about 40% of the individuals in California are filing late income taxes because of the fire? So we also, there could be a potential for better or worse income projections also in the fall.
Yeah, the governor is feeling that, and they provided an estimate of what they believe will come in terms of revenues from people who end up filing late in October. Whether that estimate is true or accurate when it actually comes in, we're not going to know until it happens. Uh, the governor said on May 14th in his press media event that he believes these numbers reflect what they believe are as real as possible in terms of the revenues that will come in October and later. What it does not include, and there's no way that it could, is whatever we think might happen at the federal level in terms of Medicaid cuts. But unfortunately, if the House bill passes the Senate as is in terms of the Medicaid cuts, those are enormous, enormous loss of federal Medicaid dollars to California. The governor actually admitted as much last night or yesterday in a press statement that he issued, blasting the House version of the House bill and the potential loss of billions and billions of dollars, Medicaid dollars to California. And so the governor knows that will have that impact if it passes. So the question is if it passes the way that the bill is in terms of what the House did last night, this morning, um, the governor recognizes because he said so yesterday that it's going to have a major impact on the California budget. So the question, what we don't know, is what does that mean? Will the governor then have to call or issue a different, a revised budget and call this, legislature back in session if this happens after August, or will he just wait until January and then call for what they call early action budget items, meaning asking the legislature to take action in January. So unfortunately, our advocacy means that we're going to have to be really vigilant, not just when a budget is passed on June 15th in California, because one will. We're going to have to be vigilant after that because whatever happens at the federal level, if it passes, is going to have an impact in terms of the state budget um, in California, and it's going to have an impact on regional centers, on Medi-Cal, on every system that we have.
Can you highlight, and just in maybe the next 15 minutes, some of the California, um, specific to California highlights, like IHSS, right? That there was a proposal for what, there was a lot of proposals, right? It was over, I don't even know how many pages you went through to read it all. But what would you say, in your opinion, would be the ones that we as advocates need to pay attention in California? And then we can talk about strategy after that.
So the big one in terms of dollar amount, and that one that was getting a lot of attention in the budget subcommittee hearings, is the governor's proposed cut to Medi-Cal that impacts primarily adults, but not only adults, but adults uh, who are not documented. Currently, if they meet the income level, their income, eligible, uh, and meet some other conditions, a person not documented can receive full scope Medi-Cal. So children, and they did it. They did this. They did the implementation over a series of years, with children going first, older people going second, and then most recently adults. And the governor is proposing to, uh, first of all, to freeze the enrollment of adults uh, for who are not documented, and then and to impose and for those people who remain in the program, the adults, to impose a premium of $100 per month. Um, there also elimination of some benefits that he's proposing for primarily adults. There's at least one that would impact children, and also eliminate for those people who would remain, um, for the people not documented, of eligibility for IHSS. And so that's a major reduction. And there was a lot of opposition expressed in the Senate and Assembly budget hearing. And we don't know how that's going to end up, but we're talking about a lot of people who could end up losing healthcare healthcare coverage. That's probably the biggest, by itself, dollar amount um, reduction in terms of human lives. The other is a governor's proposing a cap on the number of hours an IHSS worker can work per week, and so that basically the idea is to cap overtime, um, overtime and travel to 50 hours per week for individuals, for IHSS providers. So, and that produces a huge savings to the state in terms of dollars. The problem, though, is the impact to many of the providers who are either an IHSS worker for an individual. A lot of them are family members who are under protective supervision. My son, he doesn't receive IHSS currently, but when his mother was alive, his mother was a good friend of mine, and they had no family. So she had asked me to take Alex on, and I've known Alex since he was 7. But most of his life before while his mother was alive, he was under IHSS protective supervision. anybody if in this audience who is under protective supervision knows that you're going to end up needing working more hours than 50 hours a week. And there's other instances for people who have other needs that are going to face that are exceeding that number. And so there was a lot of pushback yesterday at the budget hearing and the day before that by a lot of family members, but also people who are providers or IHSS workers who were trying to express the harm that would happen to their families and to the people that they provide services to. In many cases, these are family members. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the two major big. There's other, but those two are receiving the most attention in the legislature. And right now, what we don't know is the budget hearings on the governor's May revised proposals that he released on in May 14th. The hearings are over. And so what's going to happen next week, at some point next week, is the legislature will come back with their version of what the budget should be. And so at that point, we're going to know what they think and what budget cuts or budget solutions is what the governor calls them. What changes that the legislature agrees to. Now, unfortunately, that's not the last word because what it means is the governor and the legislative leaders, the Democratic legislative leaders, the Assembly Speaker and the Senate President are meeting. Will be conducting meetings to negotiate what many refer to as a budget deal to agree, what cuts will go forward, what cuts will be rescinded, and what will the budget look like when the legislature ends up voting on something on June 15th. June 15th is the deadline in the state constitution for the legislature to pass a budget and to send it to the governor. And since a proposition that was approved by voters in 2010 that lowered the number of votes that it required to pass a budget, it's a simple majority vote unless you raise taxes. Before that, it required 2/3 vote to pass a budget, which is the reason why many of you who were around back in 2009 or those years, there was always what they call a budget stalemate. A budget never got passed on time because they never could get enough votes because they needed Republican votes to pass a budget. Since then, since 2010, and the first year it went into effect is June 2011. One other thing that changes is that if the legislature does not pass a budget and send it to the governor by June 15th, every day they fail to do so, they lose their pay every day. They forfeit it permanently. And so every year since that, they have never failed to pass a budget on time. And they won't. They will pass a budget on time on June 15th because there's nothing about losing your pay every day that is a good incentive to pass a budget. So when they pass a budget, it goes to the governor. The governor, will sign it. And there's likely to be a revised budget to that budget sometime later in the year that will reflect whatever is happening in Washington or whatever other cuts that California is getting in the coming months. Or, Beth, you were mentioning if the revenues from the people who are filing income tax due to the LA fires, roughly, that's about 40% of the filers in October. And if that number, the projection of what they're filing in terms of revenue is much lower, the governor may have to revise his budget sooner than later. And so what will that mean for us in terms of advocacy? It means that we got to stay on top of this information. And then at some point, if things look bad or if there's reductions that we believe are not fair, we're going to have to figure a way, how do we respond to that? What do we do? All of you, in this webinar, but also your friends and families, what do we do? And I don't know the answer to that as of today, because I think the answer will change over the next coming months. And I think that's one of the things but I do urge, no matter what, that all of you stay connected to good information, and stay connected with each other because we're going to need each other, not just in the next few months. We're talking about the next few years. Um, and that's
And
not,
that's no, no, I was gonna say that's a perfect segue that I put how to sign up for your CD Can newsletter in the chat. So uh you
yeah, you
can
can send an email just requesting to get the free report, just send it to my email, martyomoto@att.net. I don't know if I can put it in is there a chat? Uh,
already put it in there for you. So it's
okay.
already in there. But yes, just because
That's one,
things,
yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, and this is, one of the many reasons I really respect and admire Marty is that he's the one that stays up to 3 in the morning, deciphering thousands of pages of information, checking, double checking, and then breaking it down into a way where the average person like me can at least understand it. So thank you, Marty, for the hours, the days, the months that you spend doing that to make sure that all of our families are educated or at least have the opportunity to understand what's going on. So that was a great segue for that. We had a question about special education and in the big, beautiful bill about this move to special education block grants, and the weakening of federal oversight and accountability for IDEA. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't have insight on the any funding provisions dealing with special ed in the big beautiful bill, um, that I could give to you right now. Um, what I what I can tell you though is that, and some of you probably read this, that there was a federal district court, ruling that can be appealed that is, stopping the U.S. Department of Education from further, um, layoffs, and that ultimately was having an impact on the U.S. Department of Education's mission, which includes, special education. So I don't have an answer for you specifically on what elements of education are in the big beautiful bill. I don't recall something major, so maybe you caught something, uh, in the provisions of the 1,116 page bill. Um,
Rebecca, I'm going to give a shout out to Rebecca for that one. So let's talk about strategy for a little bit. We get multiple emails a day, from different organizations asking for, to sign on to this letter or go visit this congressperson or your local assembly member about so many issues. And you're right. Sometimes it seems overwhelming because it seems like so many of our services are being affected. So, what advice would you give us as advocates right now?
Stay connected, with good information with each other because, that's the most important thing. There's nothing worse. Back in the day when I was organizing people, in the early 2000s, when we were getting, um, major proposals for major cuts, including in 2003, a proposal by then Governor Schwarzenegger, one of his first acts, to suspend the Lanterman Act. But even before that, Governor Davis was talking about co-payments for every service and other reductions, elimination of a major portion of IHSS. The worst, and that's actually, one of the ways I met Alex's mom. She was a single parent, no family, IHSS provider, but she felt so alone and isolated, and she was getting my report, and she called me. And when you feel isolated and alone, that's like the worst possible feeling, especially if with it, if the resulting action by the state ends up taking away the very service that your son or daughter or family member needs, and it all happens when you're alone. And I think we got to make sure that doesn't happen. And as best we can is share information. It's a little bit easier now because there's social media. Unfortunately, social media has a lot of bad information too. So we're going to have to help people navigate through getting good information, stay connected to each other. Like, for instance, the question regarding special ed, I can send information back to Beth, and Beth, you can hopefully disperse it to everyone on this call. And I could do that right after we get off this webinar. Um, but the best that we can get good information is going to be important. One of the things I did last or early this morning around 3 o'clock is, or when I do reports, I always send out the source document so that people just don't have to rely on what I'm saying or what other advocacy groups are saying. A lot of times they never send out the source information. I always, if it's available, send out a link to the actual document, in this case, the budget bill and the amendments that actually say exactly what those cuts or those changes to Medicaid and to the other things that the House bill is covering so that you can see for yourself. Now, maybe it won't be you, but it could be someone else within your network of people who have access to that information. So access to the information is going to be really, really critical because if you don't have that, you're relying on someone else to interpret the information for you, but not giving you the source information so that you could double check if you wanted to. And the reason I do both is because I think our community, our families, my son, all your children or your family members deserve the respect of having good information sent to them and not just being told um, what to do or what to think or so that you have the ability, if you wish, to check out for yourself, what is in these, what are in these documents, whether it's a proposal from the governor or an action taken by the legislature, or in this case, the budget bill that the House passed early this morning. The second thing I would tell people my advice, which is I've been giving as I've been speaking across the state, is don't panic because a lot of people are afraid. Um, and people, when they're afraid, sometimes they panic. And when you panic, people do things or make wrong decisions. Do people not panicking, though, is not the same thing as not being fearful. People have a right to be fearful of what could happen to them, um, or what could happen to someone else in their community. Definitely, people who are not documented and their families have a right to feel fearful of what could happen if ICE comes by or the threat of someone coming by and taking a family member. That happened to my daughter's son's friend, his classmate. His dad was taken yesterday on Monday, um, leaving his family, a 12-year-old boy, um, totally shattered. And they took him off to Bakersfield and planned to deport him, this Friday. And people have a right to be fearful. But when that happens, I think that underscores the importance of groups like this and to provide a network of information, but also sometimes comfort because people need to know that they're not alone. And so there's that. The other thing is that I think all of you have to come together or figure out a way, what's the best way for you as individuals and you as a group in your area to respond. Not everybody can go to a rally. Not everybody is able to come to Sacramento to testify, and not all of us need to do that. So I think we have to think, what are the ways that we can respond in a way that expresses our support or our opposition to a proposed cut or a proposed change. Um, and that will change that response will change over the next several months and next several years. Understand our fight right now, especially what's going on in Washington, is not a one-time fight over the summertime. We are talking about an ongoing battle that we will have to stay vigilant and respond to over the next 4 years. Now, it might get easier if there's a change in who controls the House of Representatives after the 2026 election, but the reality is we're going to face a difficult time over the next 4 years. And so we have to realize when we talk about the time and resource that we need to respond, we have to be vigilant that we are asking our families and we're asking people with the lowest incomes and also workers who have families as well, um, and respect their limited time and resource when we ask them to do something. And we cannot just rely on the good people who are lobbyists because they're paid to do that and they're good people. But the people that they ask are not people who are paid lobbyists. They are people who, just like me with my son, are stretched in terms of their time and resource to deal with their family member or to deal with the provider. And I think we have to, and when you work on how do we respond, think very carefully of what is the best way for your community. Lastly, if you do respond, no matter what way, whether you meet with the legislator in their district office, which, by the way, if you're going to do anything, that is probably the best way is to, in their local office, Republican or Democrat, meet with them to just explain um, the impact of a cut that you heard about, or ask them to explain what their proposal is and what do they think it will mean to your family. But when you do that, I would urge all of you, don't exaggerate the impact of a potential cut. Not every cut is going to mean that we're going to end up in a nursing home. Not every cut means that we're going to lose our Medi-Cal benefit. Not every cut means that we're going to be homeless or be kicked out or be forced in an institution. But people think that they have to say those things um, because they think that's the way to get people to listen. And what happens is if you keep saying that all the time, it's human nature then to just not listen to anything you're saying. And one of the most important things is let's stay true and be authentic when we talk about our families and about our friends and about the people who provide services. And why is that going to be hard for us to do? It shouldn't, right? Be authentic, be true. Um, a cut that harms a worker because they are now going to get paid less or their organizations that they work for will receive less money. Um, Describing that harm is good is sufficient enough. Saying that your child or a family member is not going to get health care that they need. You don't have to say that they're going to die or that they're going to be, that we're going to lose our Medi-Cal benefits. That could happen. If that's the case, then we need to say that. But it's good enough or important enough to simply say that this cut's going to harm my child because they're not going to get the health care. They're not going to get the behavioral health services that they need. The state's not going to be able to respond to a crisis that my son or daughter is facing regarding a behavioral health need or whatever. And so I think we need to be true in how we speak about the impact. And that's not easy to do when we're facing potential cuts and the information is not necessarily credible. I mean, we hear all kinds of things. The other thing, and I saw this in the comment, it's going to be real important that we stay in terms of how we talk about the importance of the services that our families are getting and the services that are being provided, that we stay as nonpartisan and fair as possible, because we don't. It's not necessary. And I think one of the most important things is to remember that the Lanterman Act, we're the only state that has the Lanterman Developmental Disabilities Act, the only state to have a civil rights law specifically to protect the rights of people with developmental disabilities. I don't know if anybody knows who authored that bill and what his party affiliation was. Does anybody know? because Frank Lanterman, who was the author of that bill, was a Republican. And a lot of people may have forgotten or may not know that the governor who signed that bill was Governor Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican. And so, yeah, it's true right now. There's a lot of Republicans who many people may say have lost their way in terms of understanding people's needs, in terms of certain people's needs. Maybe, some people may take that position. And I think in terms of our fight, in terms of our response, I think we just have to be mindful of keeping our eye on what is important. And what is important, and I know because I see him every day, every night, is my son. And so I just think that's not easy to do. And I will be there to support all of you with Beth and everybody else in the coming months and years because there's no single one answer of how do we respond other than respond in a way that we don't panic, respond in a way that's truthful, and respond in a way that respects our families and the people who provide services and the other individuals, their time and resource, and try to craft a response that respects that, knowing that we're going to have to do this for the next several years. And that's not easy. Because and in doing that, knowing how to counter the fears that other people who are facing devastating actions by our federal government in terms of deportation. Whether you agree with that or not about a person's right to, stay here in this country, um, to know that there are people who are very afraid, and we have to think about the impact of that to families. I don't know if I answered your question because I can't even remember the question now.
No, no, you did good, and I was just reflecting on my own sons, right? Like what these cuts mean to my sons, or the potential of these cuts could mean to their quality of life. So no, thank you, Marty, and I
Have
think
you all? I guess a question that many of you can ask yourselves: How many of you? I don't mean talking with your legislator just when there's a budget cut and that's the only time you visit with them. It's actually carrying on an ongoing conversation, and it doesn't have to be with the legislator. It's with their staff in your own community, what they call a district office, uh, and create a situation where you're talking with them, making sure they understand the impact of a cut or a change, or asking them to explain a change of what's going on in Sacramento or in Washington. And so that what happens is that you're carrying on an ongoing conversation. What I guess the word people use now is engagement with the people who are elected to represent you, so that they know you not just when you are being threatened with a cut. They know you as a constituent, someone that they are elected to represent. And so that's how you need to come to them is a person that this person represents me. And they need to explain things to you, or you need to also explain, hey, this is where my son or daughter or whatever, this is how they get services. You don't even have to say that they could lose it. But a lot of these staffers who work for a legislator, by the way, I was a legislative staffer way back in the 80s. Um, they're all good people, most of them, but a lot of them have no idea how your son or daughter, how our family members or anyone else is getting services, healthcare. Many people think if we're talking about people who are eligible for regional center services, a lot of people think that the regional centers are taking care of everything that we would possibly need, and including housing, which is not true. And I think that is something. If they get to know you, then that's a good way of educating them. A good example of how raising awareness, and you do this with the autism walks, you do this in other advocates way back with autism way back 20, 30 years ago. And Beth, you were, in the early days, well, not that far back for you.
I was a toddler. Yes,
You're
I
just a
was a toddler
little kid.
then.
I know everyone's gonna in this group here is just we're barely born, but I remember there was a huge effort to educate the general population that did not know about anything about autism. And that was really important because there was a lot of ignorance and people not aware of what autism was and the impact to families, especially, had no idea. And no idea about the epidemic of what autism ended up being and still continues to be, and the need of services as it evolved, from children to now many moving into adulthood or even older. And there was a major effort to educate people, actually the autism community too, to know what was possible. But beyond that, the legislature and the general public now, 30 or 40 years later, even though there's still major challenges to people with autism and their families, um, the awareness issue is much better than it was. Now, maybe it's not always correct, but there's more people who know or are familiar with the word autism. They have something in their mind of what that means. Most of the time it's not correct, but at least they're familiar. And so awareness matters because if you have to even explain what autism, that they have no idea what that is, um, then it's much harder to talk about the need for services. So I think what we have to do is start reaching out to your local elected officials on an ongoing basis, and then start, engaging with them with an ongoing conversation. So it's not just on budget cuts. Because, by the way, there's things. Someone just raised a question about the ASD, about the autism report that's supposedly going to come out in the end of September about what causes autism, right? And we're all just really anxious for that to come out. I've been waiting for it. I'm sure all of you have too. That actually is a good question because when things like that come out, whether it's from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and there's other things coming out in terms of regulations or reports from the other departments now, regardless of what you think about the Trump administration or whatever, we need to be visible and to be able to respond when information like that comes out. Because if it's incorrect or it's something we don't agree with or something we do agree with, we need to respond. I said in some other speeches where I've given on advocacy that there's a line in a TV show that goes that decisions are made by those who show up. And I added a line since then to that, which is, and decisions are still made when we don't show up. And I think that underscores our responsibility as family members, but also as advocates, whether you have a disability or or the workers who provide services, that we have to be there. So whatever it takes, and it might be that we have to rely on a friend or someone else to speak for us, but whatever it takes, we got to be involved and we got to be there. We got to show up in some way. And so, Beth, for all of you on this webinar, but even beyond it, showing up doesn't have to be that you show up at a rally or you have to go to Sacramento or you have to do a certain thing that someone says you have to do. Be creative. There's a whole lot of other ways you can, quote, show up and be effective and to speak for your families or for yourself. And someone might come up with a different idea, but whatever it is, the last thing we should do is be silent and not respond. So, but what I am saying is there's different ways for us to respond, and I don't know all the ways. And there's going to be a different response that's going to be required of us, different for every individual, um, over the next 4 years. So think about.
Yeah, that was a perfect ending. We are at time. Like I said, I know you are such a wealth of knowledge. We could continue this conversation, but thank you. I hope you saw in the chat how many people appreciated your ability to break down the information in a nonpartisan way. Going to put another plug in for your newsletter. Sign up at Marty Omoto at att.net. And it's a wonderful resource. Marty puts a lot of time and effort, and he does it because he cares. Marty is not a big lobbyist. He doesn't get paid tens of thousands of dollars. He does it because this is important to him. So I hope you can see all the thank yous, Marty.
I
Thank you
see
to
that.
everybody who stayed on.
Beth, can you give me some of the questions that I wasn't able to get to, or some of the points that people have asked? If you can get those to me, I'd like to be able to respond, and you can pass it on to everybody because
Yeah,
there's
that would
a
be
lot of
great.
good.
I'll do if you could do that, I'll do a special like newsletter edition so we can.
Yeah, there's a lot of good questions. I mean, someone asking about advocating now for those with permanent disabilities, and there's other things that in some cases we don't have. It's not in the bill, but we need to know that. So these are all good questions.
Yeah. Also, a special thanks to Miss Liliana, who was our amazing interpreter uh, tonight. So thank you so much for Miss Liliana. Marty did a good job of slowing down. So,
Yeah, normally yeah.
but we appreciate it. But yes,
And whoever
thank.
RA, thank you for you're really on point. I really appreciate your points, by the way. I mean, everybody, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and take care. All right. Bye bye.